and thank you all for coming and joining. So for those of you who may not know me or have seen me before, my name's Bridget, and I hope you enjoy today's presentation. I'm going to share my screen just so you know. It'll take a moment to catch up, so just bear with me as we start sharing. And at any point, if you can't hear me or have any questions, just let me know. Okay, here we go. Okay, all right. So today we are talking about, I'm going to share with you some of my experiences working in childcare and working as a teacher, and some personal experiences. The first will be a story that I was my first full-time job in childcare with a group of students over time. And then the second part of the presentation will sort of be more vignettes, smaller stories about specific children, and more in the moment, quick stories. All right. And in tradition, let's let the slideshow catch up with us. It always takes a moment to kind of catch up to speed with the shared screen. So just hold on a moment. Okay, so, all right, here we go. All right, so a bit about me for those of you who may not have been on a presentation with me before. So again, my name's Bridget. I live in a suburb just north of Boston, Massachusetts. I have been working in summer camps and after-school programs for the past handful of years since 2014. So I have a degree in communications and performing arts with minors in writing and education from a school in Boston, Wheelock College, which is now merged with Boston University. So like I said, I've worked with students of all ages, from as young as 2 or 3 years old to as old as high school, 15, 16 years old. Mainly, I've worked with elementary age students, so kindergarten through 5th grade, or 5 years old through about 10 or 11 years old. All right, okay, and with that, let's get started. So for those of you who have been on some of my presentations from last week, and for those of you who are just joining us, here are some bits of information that we've learned or talked about before that would be applicable to today's presentation. So we talked about the 5 W's: who, what, when, where, and why, and how to kind of engage those 5 W's into thinking about your audience, who you're working with, the kids you're working with, and how to apply that to your work for the best possible outcome. We talked about this metaphor called the iceberg metaphor, which is this idea of everyone or every situation has more than you see on the surface, similar to an iceberg, which we'll get to more in just a moment. Transition times being a huge piece in working with children or in teaching or in childcare, how to tackle these times to make them as smooth as possible. And in part of that, having your toolbox ready, so your go-to strategies, your go-to games, your go-to questions you might ask your students, and transforming moments. So how to sort of use our yes and improvisation technique to taking a moment that might be stressful or negative or upsetting and then transforming it into something that's positive or a learning experience at that time. Okay, so like I mentioned before, the first story I'm going to share with you was about a group of students who was my first group of students I worked with full time. I'd worked in summer camps and after-school programs before this, but I was walking into an iceberg. So there was some surface level things I saw, but I learned that there was so much more, and I will share that with you tonight. So the 5 W's. So it was myself and what I was told as the difficult kids. So again, this was an after-school program in my region and where I am in Massachusetts. And I worked with them for over 3 years, or about 3 years throughout the year. Mainly, we're going to focus on this school year for about September through June, for 3 school years. So again, I walked into this job and I was told these are the difficult kids. These kids are really hard, and oh gosh, you have those kids, that was what I was walking into when I started this job in particular, or I actually started part-time and came into this full-time job at the time. So what was I doing? Our second W. So on top of this being part of a step in my career and the start of my career, really, I wanted to be there for these kids. I wanted to be a good role model. I wanted to, see what was going on, see what they were about, and ultimately help them and hope that they felt happy and safe in their after-school programming. That was my goal. And walking into it, I didn't quite understand this big, oh, those kids. It was a bit threw me off. I didn't quite understand what was going to happen. So why did I do this? A lot of people or some people may say, oh, okay, maybe not. Maybe this isn't for me. Or they might have, walked away at first. But I, kind of wanted to push through, and I was determined to really sort of see what was going on, and they deserved a chance. These students who might not have been dealt the best hand, or, maybe weren't sure where they were going, in the next steps of their young lives, needed someone to help them. So hopefully I could be that person for them. So the start. So the start was a bit rocky, as you may have imagined. On top of this being my first job, my first full-time job, I did not have a lot of support or resources. And the ones that I did have seemed to have already given up on this particular program and this particular group of kids. So we had a lot of these behaviors, eye rolling, kind of laughing off, like, oh, yeah, okay. Yeah, right, Miss Bridget, you don't know what you're doing, kind of a thing. I was told many times that I was too nice and too patient with them, and they almost wanted me to react to them, to lose my cool, to yell at them. And, the fact that I didn't, a lot of the time, they were sort of surprised or just, oh, wow, you're too nice. You should really be reacting to us negatively. What's going on there, sort of thing. There was a bit of a curiosity behind there. So there was a lot of these different things, a lot of bickering between these students, a lot of fighting, a lot of rudeness to each other. I don't care, trying to justify inappropriate behavior or bad behavior by saying, well, I can do it at home, or so-and-so could let me, a previous staff member. And it's like, well, so-and-so, I'm here, so-and-so isn't here. So unfortunately, this is what we got to do, is how I'd sort of react. Well, okay. So I know you can do it at home, but we're not at home. We're in school. So I understand that might be frustrating, but this is the rule. So that's the expectation. Got to do it. So this is sort of how I started. Also, a coworker of mine who would frequently come in would get into these power struggles, as we call them, which for those of you who may not know, power struggle being when, a student or a child challenges you on, it could be anything. It could be the silliest thing. It could be, your shoe's untied. No, it's not. Well, yes, it is. No, it's not. That's the power struggle right there. And often this coworker of mine would get into these power struggles with these students, and she would frequently end up saying directly to these students' faces that essentially she thought they were the most disrespectful, or they were very uncaring or rude. And, while on surface level they didn't seem affected, you could tell how much it impacted them, because they would later speak, and I will share this more over time, like, there was clearly a conflict between the students and the staff member, and it was an interesting spot to be in the center of it and sort of weighing, the situation from the outside and sort of helping the young students sort of kind of come over that and how to navigate that. So over time, I went to my job day to day. I worked with these students and I tried to continue my patience, but I also put up boundaries. So, at the beginning, I definitely would give in to students a bit more if they said, well, 10 more minutes for this. Oh, okay, well, I guess 10 more minutes wouldn't hurt, and would kind of let them sort of run the show, if you will. So while I continued patience, I also put up boundaries where I said, you know what? Yeah, I know you need 10 more minutes to do this, but right now we got to do this. But at the end of the day, I'm sure we'll have some time and you can do this then. We sort of this compromise, doing this by listening to students' needs. So something we'd run into often is when to do certain things like having time for homework or having time to go outside or go to the gym so they could get some energy out, and sort of trying to listen to them and say, okay, well, why do you need this and when do you need it? And let's sort of work together. So for example, we may have had homework time later in the day at first, but some students said, no, I really need to do my homework right away. And, a lot of them expressed, and we'd all have a conversation together and we would make, our plan from there. So, and then once we kind of had a schedule and a certain routine, to stick with it. That is a huge thing, to have a set routine and schedule, because they know what's expected. And it might be tricky at first, but over time, it definitely helps to have that set routine, that set schedule. So they know, okay, well, it's 3:00. Yep, 3:00. I know I have to put my homework away, or, it's time to transition from this one activity to the next, or whatever that may look like. So, and then having a toolbox. So, like I mentioned, my resources at first, my toolbox was not very full. I was kind of going in there with very limited knowledge and, not a lot of resources, not so much knowledge, but experience. I had some years of experience, mostly at summer camps. I had never attended an after-school program myself as a child, so I had, not a certain perspective coming from their shoes, since I had not done after-school program myself. So I had to sort of build up my toolbox over time. Whether that was looking up engaging activities for their age group, or, asking them, okay, well, what would you be interested in, or going to my superiors or my coworkers and sort of gaining their, expertise or their resources as well, to sort of build on my own. So over time, like I said, I, got new coworkers who had different areas of behavior management. One coworker who's now one of my really great friends, she would be often a great help. I would call her up and say, hey, this is something that's going on. Can you help me? And she would always listen, and we would help each other out. And then trainings. This organization was great at providing trainings, so I would really sort of listen and try to take that and apply whatever I learned into my work. And some of it was trial and error, some of it worked, and I really just tried to stick with it. Strict boundaries, like I said, getting that schedule and sticking to it. And also setting the expectation of their behavior at the time. So for example, this group of kids, they loved going to the gym. They loved having that time. However, at the start, it was very chaotic. These kids would go and they'd run and they would, throw balls everywhere, materials everywhere. And it was very unorganized, very chaotic. And if you let them, they would just spend their time that way, which was very overwhelming and not very productive for the students. So when I stepped in, I created this expectation, which was when we would come to the gym, they would sit down, and when everyone seemed ready to go, which meant like respectful listening, ready to hear the instructions, ready to hear what game we were playing, they would they would look and sound ready. I would try the different toolbox tools, whether it's, can you hear my voice clap once? Can you hear my clap twice? Those different techniques. Unfortunately, students would still challenge this. They would try to climb on different structures in the gym, or, be yelling out or talking disrespectfully, or, doing other things to try to bother other students. So I would wait. And I kept it very clear, like, when you're all ready, we'll start. And this tactic isn't always the best for every group of students, but for this group of students, I learned this is what they needed. And I would just sit and I would wait, and moments would go by and I'd say, this is your time. So you all can choose to spend it however you want to. And I would love for you to play a game, but whatever happens, we are leaving at 4 o'clock. You kind of make the choice here. What are you going to do? And decide based on what you act like, that'll show me what you're choosing. And over time, students sort of learned like that I wasn't going to budge, that I would sit there and I would wait. And I wouldn't lose my cool. I would just sit and I'd say, yep, all right, this is what we're doing. And when they seemed ready, we would go. We would play the game and we would have a good time. And when 4 o'clock rolled around, we would leave. And one of my students, she, out of frustration, felt like we were wasting so much time because of how her peers were acting, to the point where she wrote down a schedule of sorts on a piece of paper, mapping out how much time it took for how everyone sat down, how much time it took for everyone to listen, to explain the rules of the game we were playing, to clean up, all these different things. And she sort of would show her students like, guys, look at this. This is what's happening. And we could have so much more time if we just came together. And that's exactly what I'm trying to tell you. So, she kind of caught onto that, and when, worked with her peers, and they kind of worked together and needed that bit of tough love and tough expectation. And they knew I wasn't just sitting there just because I felt like it. It wasn't because I was being mean. It was because I have this expectation, and when the expectation's met, we will go on. If this was a group of students, brand new students, who, presented themselves a bit differently, I don't think I would be so strict. But because this group of students had learned that, they could run around, be chaotic, they sort of needed that hard boundary. So calling the bluff. So at the same time, as I got to know my students, I learned their personalities. I learned what they were trying to do to push my buttons. I learned, where they were in their heads and how they felt throughout the day. I had this one student who had a hard time, and he was older. He was an older student at the time. He was about 6th grade. And one day, all he wanted to do was to go home, which I can understand. Long day, it's hard. And his tactic, however, to try to do this was to refuse to do much, be disrespectful, bothering other students, many things that might get one sent home. And I said to him, look, I know you don't want to at the time he was refusing to go eat snack. He was sitting in the hallway, arms crossed, sitting on the floor of the hallway saying, I'm not going. Nope, you can't make me. And I said, look, I understand you don't want to be here. I understand you want to go home. However, your parents need you here for a reason. They have to work. And I know that might be frustrating. So what we need to do for you to get through this day as pleasantly as possible is for you to get up, come in here, eat some snack. I know it's not what you want to do, but that's what I got. Like, you can't just get what you want from this, from bothering your friends or for being disrespectful. Like, this is what you got to do. I know it stinks, but this is where we are. He got up. He went to snack, throughout the day, he must have adjusted, hung out with his friends, and then by the end of the day, he was going home. He was fine. So he just kind of needed that bit of that tough love of saying, look, I know, I hear you, I see you, but this is what we got to do. I know it's tough, but that's what happens sometimes. So over time, I got this slow gain trust with these students. Again, being transparent with them was huge. Unfortunately, in their young lives, I think they'd seen a lot in the worlds around them that was really tricky or tough. So I think that they were a bit skeptical of new people, new adults, situations. So, if I asked them to do something and they challenged why, having that transparency of like, well, because, and giving them a concrete reason. So for example, well, we're doing this because our schedule says that we're going here next, and we're going here next because I think it's important that you guys have a bit of snack, or, it's really important to have some time to take a break from your homework. So that's why we're going to go get some outside time. So having that transparency and really letting them know, like, this is the reason, and not just saying, it's just because, or because I said so, or anything like that. Okay, so how is this done? So I met them where they were at. So again, showing a little bit of understanding and empathy, but also holding those boundaries were very huge. And over time, they sort of were able to take my temperature a little bit and say, okay, this is the type of person she is. This is how I can, I can sort of be vulnerable a bit around her. One thing that we slowly developed towards the last year or so of my time there is some of my girls would say, if they felt something was unfair or they were feeling frustrated or something, and they felt like they needed to be heard and heard almost right away, they'd say, can we have a real talk? And that was a signal to me that I said, okay, something's going on and they need to be talked to seriously in that moment. This could be anything from scheduling to just different things that they felt were unfair or frustrating. And so as soon as they said, can we have a real talk? I meant, okay, they need to have talk soon. And sometimes they'd say, okay, what's up? And other times they'd say, give me 10 minutes. I got to finish something else. And then I'll be able to talk with you. And then we did. I always had to follow through on that promise. That follow through was huge, because if I said yes, 10 minutes, and I never did, then they would, that trust would be taken back a bit. Also, putting a positive spin on things, translating bad behavior into good qualities. The student I mentioned, the same one who was refusing to go to snack, was also very competitive. And he was one of the older students in the group. And one day he was sort of trying to get everyone around them to sort of push back against me as the teacher. I couldn't tell you why, I don't quite remember, but he was very determined to sort of turn everyone together and to push back. And so I took him aside, I was like, look, like, you have really good leadership skills. You do, you're really good at doing that. Like, you're a great leader. Like, these are the things that you have going for you, but here's what you need to do going forward. I was like, I understand that you might be frustrated with me or upset or, whatever, but you're using your energy, all these good skills, all this great energy, but there's nothing that, going after me or going after another student or whatever it might be, how productive is that going to be? What are you trying to accomplish? So, like, think of what your skills are and, like, use them. And he was like, no, I'm not a good leader. Like, you're crazy. Like, what's wrong? Like, and I was like, no, seriously, you're a great leader. So use it, And I don't think he'd ever heard that before, because every time he'd tried to use these skills was always for a negative impact. So I think hearing that for the first time was a bit surprising for him. And then lastly, rewarding and recognizing good behavior. So for the gym time, like I'd mentioned, once we kind of got in that rhythm of like, okay, yep, you know, I'm not going to make them sit there for no reason. You know, I had that expectation. You sit, once you're good, we'll go. And that's just what I did. They sat, they were ready to go, we went. So also, if we were having a good day, um, using that yes and mentality that we've talked about before in previous presentations. So two students came up to me and say, hey, we want to play this game, but we want it to be us two versus everyone else, when usually it was a game where teams were split in half. So I said, okay, if that works for everyone, that works for me. And we asked everyone, yeah, that's great, let's do that. And it was great. I had no reason to say no to their idea, and it was something that everyone seemed excited about. Everyone was having a good time, so it just sort of went with a flow of positive energy and just sort of helped reward like, okay, yep, this is great, this is a good idea, let's go for it. So the end and after. So as I was closing in on my last year I'd worked with them, I realized that we'd come a long way from this rowdy group of, quote, difficult students, unquote, that I had met on my first day of this program. The students who were rolling their eyes at me and fighting back and challenging me in every step on my first week or first days were then coming to me and asking for advice. So for example, two students that I'd had since the beginning came up to me one spring afternoon, I think the last year I was there, and they said, hey, can we ask your advice about something? And I said, sure, what's going on? And they said, well, can we actually ask you away from other students? And I said, sure. And so we stepped into my office at the time, and they told me how, these two girls were best friends, and they were told me how they were a bit frustrated because one of the other younger students was always in their bubble and kind of, they're like, well, we like being her friend, but sometimes we just want to spend time with us, but we don't want to be mean. And I was so touched because these two girls 2 years before would have, maybe said something not so kind to this younger student, maybe had given her the cold shoulder or ignored her or been, said some unkind things. And now they were being so compassionate and mindful and saying, oh, we don't mind being her friend. We like her, but like we just want some space. So, kind of giving them strategies on, okay, that's really great that you girls have thought of this and came to ask someone for help, and sort of helping them recognize that. And then also just having that conversation and helping them strategize with her. So having this trust, similar to that example, and sort of them believing me at my word and me taking them at their word, working together with that a bit. And then lastly, I had left this position and had come into, I went into my next step of my career, but I had visited with another friend of mine who had also left. And I had visited one day at one of their after school, summer camp days, and I'd seen one of my kids, and she said, can you please come back? And I said, why? What's going on? Is everything okay? She had this urgency in her voice, and she just said, oh my gosh, the new director, he's really giving us a hard time. He just tells us to do the things and doesn't tell us why. And it's just so frustrating, and he doesn't listen to us like you listen to us. And I was like, oh my gosh. And it broke my heart a bit because I wasn't able to go back at that time and to hear the position they were in. And but at the same time, it made me kind of reflect a bit about our journey together. I'm sure there were moments where they said, I don't care if you're here. I don't, whatever. I don't care, who you are. You're just a teacher. You're just my after school teacher, whatever. And then now, years later, I was like, can you please come back? And it was sort of this odd moment of, wanting to help, but also not being able to, unfortunately. So just sort of, again, helping her in the moment of, okay, well, let's look at the bright side of this and like, how can we make this better? And sort of being able to kind of help her out a little bit. So looking back on the whole situation now, which seems like so long ago, though it was only a few years, I realized that what they needed, those specific group of students, they needed tough love. They needed to be engaged. Again, this group of students who were very mature for their age, they wanted to be challenged. They wanted to see the world, really dig into it. They wanted to have a purpose. So some things that they ended up loving to do was picking up litter. Their nearby woods that, unfortunately had some trash in it. They love to just get bags and help clean up the earth. They also at summer camp had a group of students, a lot of these students in particular, go to a senior center and connect with a senior citizen and read with them and talk with them. So they really liked being engaged with one another, and really feeling like they had a purpose. And I think being seen and being heard was part of this. Also, they wanted to have fun. These poor kids, I think they were given such a hard time by teachers before them and in and outside of the classroom, that they didn't have fun. And I think there's a bit of a give and take there with, expectations of student behavior, but also letting them have that good time, letting them play two versus everyone else in the gym. There was one field trip we went on that there was kind of a cave of sorts and they got spooked, and they said it was the best thing they ever did because they were given a little bit of freedom to wander this area in Boston, and they had a good time. And because it was a little spooky and they were that age where, those spooky things were really fun and exciting, it really, really helped them out. And they needed a safe environment. They wanted to feel like they could trust the person they were with, and that the person they were with could kind of work with them a bit. They needed to feel safe. And I think all kids need these things, and to feel safe, to have fun, and to feel like they're being heard to some degree. I think those all things are important. This was not an everyday successful moment. It wasn't like I was going upstairs and every moment was reaching toward this goal that happened in the end. There was lots of up and down moments, days where I've lost my patience a bit more, or, became really frustrated, or, different things. Or sometimes my tactics didn't work, or my resources weren't there to help me. So not every day was perfect. It wasn't until after that I said, oh my gosh, like, look what happened throughout all this time. But persistence is key, I think, as well. Okay, so moving on to the second part of this presentation. So talking about in the moment, these little sort of snippets that I've seen over time that are pretty common working with students. So frequently that there might be a child who is overwhelmed. So what to do with this? These students could be a new student to your program or classroom, or a student who may just get overwhelmed easily. So things like having things written down for them, clear instructions, and reminding them to take deep breaths. Reminding them it's okay if this isn't, nothing's perfect. It's okay. And just having that reassurance really goes a long way. The overstimulated child. This is a bit different. So a child who's overstimulated might do things like this picture, block their ears. They might, clench their bodies a lot. They might have a lot of energy and just run around and not really know how to be in control of their bodies. They don't know how to self-regulate. So it means that, just like I said, they don't know how to self-regulate. They don't know how to calm themselves down and kind of bring back themselves so they're a bit grounded so that they can move forward with their day or be productive. And so one thing that you can do to help these children is deep breathing. I have a student where I say, okay, look at me, look at my eyes, deep breaths, and I'll do it with them. I'll say, deep breaths. Okay. And I'll count, okay, 5 more, 5, 4, and, we'll go, and that seems to help. Another thing that helps children who are overstimulated is to squeeze something like Play-Doh or a stress ball, and just having that tactile squeeze, or even pushing their body against the wall, or just pushing their hands against the wall and pushing will help them. It's sort of this grounding pressure, and that helps them sort of regain that self-control. The angry child. So number one, with students who are angry, or any student in any situation, it just happens in my experience that this is most often with angry children, things can kind of get out of hand. I've had students who are violent with me or other students. So number one, safety. Making sure that child's safe, you are safe, and other students or coworkers are safe. So whatever that means, I've had moments where I've had to evacuate rooms because a child has become violent. I've had moments where I've had to stand by a door and had 2 other staff members sort of, stand by as we kind of helped the child calm down. So, safety is number one, making sure everyone is safe, or as safe can be. Redirecting. So this is something I had observed early on, right before I transitioned into my full-time position that I had been talking about the first part. I had a student once who was very, very angry. He was shouting, he was yelling, he was very expressive how he felt, and he dropped to the floor and refused to move. And my coworker at the time, he was like, all right, I'm going to scoot on the floor with you. And he dropped to the floor and was like, show me the way. What are we going to do? We're going to, and they were scooting around using their legs, and sort of that's how they were moving about, and I think that to me was an early example of saying yes, and seeing this child who was angry, and this is what he do. He threw himself to the floor, and that's what he was going to do, and he wasn't going to get up, and he was expecting the angry reaction of, you need to get up right now, stand on your feet. But instead, this coworker was like, okay, let's go on the floor, let's do it. And sort of did that with him, and that helped redirect that moment. So that child helped, okay, all right. So he helped calm down a little bit. I hate you. Ugh, those are still hurtful words if I hear them from a student, but please know that these things aren't personal. Usually, in my experience, I had a student once who me and another student were playing soccer, and me and this other child were passing the ball back and forth, and the other child kicked it, and it hit this one student right in her face. This child who got hit and was always having a hard time, definitely had a lot going on beneath her iceberg that I, to this day, am not quite sure. I didn't have that student for very long, but she turned, looked right at me, and just screamed, I hate you. And I, had this moment of like, oh my gosh, it all had happened so fast. But in that moment, she just needed to get her anger out, and she walked away, and she needed to take a breath, and would let her happen. And she and I touched base afterwards, and we were able to move forward. Slamming doors. This is another example. I've had students slam doors or kids I've been babysitting slam doors on me because they weren't getting something that they wanted. And again, don't take this personally. Usually this is just their showing of frustration or disappointment towards whatever the situation is. I notice a lot of times it's a reaction to a boundary that's being set, and they're not sure how to handle it. So that is a lot of the times what you see. The sad child. So I think a lot of times kids hear, don't cry, it's okay, don't be sad, but letting them know, I understand you're upset, that's okay. Do you want to talk? Sometimes they'll say yes, sometimes they will say no. And whatever you need, okay, well, when you're ready, I'll come back, I'll come check in on you, I'll give you a couple minutes, I'm going to check on you a little bit. And again, following through with that, coming back, saying, okay, how you doing now? Oh, you look a little bit like you've cheered up. Do you want to talk about what happened earlier? Sometimes they'll say yes, sometimes they'll say no. And just sort of being able to touch base with them. Sometimes they're just having a moment and that happens. But reassuring them that you're here for them and it's okay to be sad, and trying to say, oh, I'm so glad you're feeling like better, can go a long way. the fearful child. So a lot of kids can be fear motivated. They're afraid of getting in trouble. They're afraid of their parents being upset with them, or they're afraid of failing. I had a child once who, as soon as he knew he did something that was inappropriate or not okay, he'd say, "Am I good? Am I good? Did I do okay? Am I good?" And he knew the answer was no, that wasn't okay. But he needed that validation that, yes, no, you're good, you're okay. So having that child, again, take deep breaths, saying, it's going to be okay. Here's what happened, but here's how we can turn it around. And being honest with them and saying, okay, well, here's what happened, and that's might be tricky or upsetting or, whatever it may be, but here's how we can make it better. Here's how we can transform it and make it positive. And that can kind of relieve this anxiety that they're feeling. Okay, and one of my last anecdotes. So this is a drawing I made from summer camp. I had a child who was afraid of thunder, and living in New England during the summer, we get a lot of thunderstorms, and she was so scared. You could just feel the anxiety and the fear coming off of her about these thunderstorms. So, and she said, I want to go home. I don't want to be here. Unfortunately, that wasn't an option at that time to send her home. So I said, okay, well, do you know what happens? Do you know what thunder is? Do you know why we hear thunder? And she said, no. She was about 7 or 8 years old. So, okay. And so I drew this picture, and you might see it's 2 clouds coming together with rain. One says, nice rain, man. And one says, thanks, I made it myself. And then they high five and it goes boom. So this was a moment of me kind of saying, I know you're afraid and it makes a big sound, but this is why. And it's just part of nature. And that seemed to help her just enough to kind of go through the rest of her day and not be so afraid and relieve some of that anxiety that she was feeling. Again, taking a moment and transforming it into something else can be huge. So, all right, and with that, I'll come back and answer any questions or comments that you may have.